Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to be discussing Doctor Who Series 12, specifically, did it improve? Now, I have some actually very specific criteria when talking about this series that I want to look at. I actually did a video several months ago where I suggested 5 things that I thought would help to improve the show, and for the ones where they did actually go that direction, I'm going to be discussing whether or not that actually worked, whether or not this season actually improved because of the changes that were made. So I'm going to break down the 5 things that I suggested in that video, starting with memorable villains. Did this series have memorable villains? For me, it did. So in that respect, yes, they changed, because for Series 11, I really didn't think there were many memorable villains. The only thing that really sticks out to mind, and here's a point where I will say, spoiler warning for Series 11 and 12, you've been warned, the only one that I really recall from Series 11 is the Dalek. And also, in terms of the Dalek for Series 11, it's debatable which series it even belongs to. I would actually stand that it belongs to Series 12 because it's the special that comes before the series, even though it aired closer to Series 11. That's my take on it, and also it's coming out with the Blu-ray. But yeah, it's a special, it's complicated. Most of the rest of that, you've got pretty filler villains or villains that aren't really villains. It's kind of meh in regards to the villains. Tim Shaw was alright, I thought, but other than that, it's like, yeah, you've got these people that are just kind of there and they don't really stand out to you as a presence. Series 12, you have villains that have a presence. Even just talking about Zelen, I thought he was a memorable villain. He had a presence within that story. And then you have somebody like the Master who has such a presence about him and has this dynamic and this relationship with the Doctor that I think works really well. But of course, that is building upon that character because we've seen the Master plenty of times. But I personally was a fan of Sacha Dhawan's portrayal of that character. So while it is a unique portrayal of the Master, like, yeah, we've seen the Master before. That's not an original character, even though it is an original interpretation of that character. And as for the Cybermen, I thought they were pretty standout for the most part. I liked what was done with them, Ashad in particular. He is very unique in terms of the Cybermen, and he gives us a different aspect to them that I don't think we've really seen before. And I thought that was really cool. So they are very memorable, but if you're kind of looking at the season as a whole and looking at which episodes they were in, they're in almost half the season, basically, because the Master is in the first 2 episodes, even though he's not so much in the first episode, and then Ashad is in the final 3, and of course the Master's in the last one, so they're across basically half of the season, even though it's the beginning and the end, but they're very memorable, so in that respect, yeah, I think they stood out, and even though there are some villains in here that are a bit filler, in terms of the villains, I think it was a huge improvement, and that generally improved the series, because if Series 11 was, say, the introduction to these characters, which I would argue they did a mixed job of introducing all 4 of these characters, but if that's what that was, and then this series you can kind of raise the stakes and have these villains that are just this great, which you probably could have done for Series 11, but they didn't. But with Series 12, they were really able to improve the villains for me, and that really elevated the season because the episodes that had strong villains, really they centered that episode around them to an extent. Spyfall is very much a Master story, and he is central to that, and him and his relationship with the Doctor make that story what it is. So in terms of this first aspect, yeah, I think it was a huge improvement. Moving on, one of the things that I really wanted was character development for the Doctor and Yaz, and I think we got that for the most part. Starting off with the Doctor, she has a lot going on in this series. We're introduced to this whole mystery, and we start off at a place in this season where we find out, oh, Gallifrey has been destroyed, and we discover that, of course, this is affecting the Doctor a lot, and we see that crop up throughout the series, and that informs her character. And then throughout it, more things are happening. She learns about another incarnation of herself that she has never seen before, which also gives her another thing to worry about and informs where that character is going and where she is coming from. And I thought that was all played out really well, and it offered for some different perspectives we really hadn't seen throughout Series 11. Through Series 12, we really get a chance to see this Doctor shine, and I honestly thought she was even better this series than she was last series, because Jodie Whittaker got to really portray that character and the things that were affecting her in ways that we just did not get in the previous series, and I thought that they did a really fantastic job of adding new levels to that character while still managing to have the previous elements that we had seen in Series 11 through that character be in this series. I loved everything that they did with her character, except for one nitpick that I have with the Timeless Children, which I will not get into here. So talking about Yaz a little bit and her character development, I wasn't quite as happy with this as I was with 13's. I liked what they did with her in the second half of the series. I think the first half really neglected her, but the second half, yes, she got some great stuff to do in here, especially in Can You Hear Me? We got to see some insight into that character, which I absolutely loved. And just in general, in the second half of the season, there were glimpses into her that I was really interested by and fascinated by. And I liked the scenes that she had with Bradley Walsh's character, Graham. And I just thought that in the second half of the season, she clicked more for me and she worked for me. And especially in Can You Hear Me, which was a great story and really gave us some insight into that character, which I thought was great. First half didn't go so well, but the second half, I was really happy with what they did with Yaz. And I don't want to overstate it. It wasn't amazing, but I thought it was really good. And it was the best of those three characters, because I do think Graham and Ryan were definitely a little bit neglected, but I think Yaz did get some good stuff to do, and I was happy with her in this series. The next thing that I said might help Series 12 improve was high concept stories. Now, what I meant by this was something like It Takes You Away. I thought that was a high concept story. It dealt with some really interesting themes, and just the overall structure of the story, it felt different. When I was watching it, it didn't feel like an average episode of Doctor Who. It went through several different locations, and the feel of each separate segment of it felt organic, but also really weird, but it flowed together really well. I was really happy with how that story came out, and I happened to love it. And for me, it just gave me this feeling that no other episode of Doctor Who really has, and that's kind of what I meant by high concept stories. For me, they didn't really do that for this series, so I'm not really going to be judging it based off of that. That was just one idea I had of, oh, this might actually be able to improve the series if they get more stories like that, just because that was something I knew that they could do because I loved It Takes You Away so much. Fugitive of the Judoon was the only episode that really gave me a feeling that I don't feel like I've gotten from any other episode of Doctor Who. I'm not entirely sure I would classify it as high concept. That was just something I used to describe the feeling that I had from It Takes You Away. But I was really happy with Fugitive of the Judoon and what they did with that story. And it did, on some level, offer me a really unique experience, which I was really happy with. So that was good. Now, the second to last thing that I thought would improve Series 12 was MultiPart Stories. Obviously, they did this. They did Spyfall, and they did the finale. And for you, it's really a matter of, did this improve those stories? And honestly, I really think it did. I think Spyfall could not have been a single part story. There's no way that would have worked. They had so much they had to do. Already, it felt like it was cramming just a tiny bit too much in it. For my personal opinion, as much as I love that story, I think it puts just a tiny bit too much in it. So if you were to cram all that stuff that they have going on with all these different characters and storylines into just one single episode, there's no way that would have worked. So for me, I thought that was a great story, and it could not have worked as a single part story. Looking at the finale, I also really like the finale, not as much as Spyfall, and I don't know if the finale could have actually been done as a single part story. I really feel like it couldn't, but it is definitely possible it could be pulled off. Definitely more so than Spyfall, because it does very much have separate things going on with the Cybermen and then separately with the Timeless Child. So yeah, I think maybe it could have been done separately, but I don't think it would have been as good, because with that story, what you have is you've got all the Cybermen stuff going on to balance with this exposition of who the Timeless Child is. So I think that is integrated well and kind of balances between those two things, which you couldn't really get if you had a single part story, because it's just too much to cram into one episode. At least that's how I feel about it. So I think that for the multi-part stories, they really did improve this series and got us some great episodes, specifically Spyfall, which I just loved, and I don't think they could have gotten those episodes if they had not done multi-part stories, so I was really happy with that. The final thing I thought might improve Series 12 was a big finale. What I wanted was just one of those finales that's so memorable and just leaves you with this taste in your mouth that, yes, this is Doctor Who. What a fantastic way to close out a season. That is amazing. Which finales those would be to you will vary from person to person. For me, the Russell T Davies finales always did that. I love all of those finales, and they just put you on this big adventure, and you leave it, at least for me, going, yes, that was awesome. I absolutely loved that. And that's not quite what the story did, but it is undeniably a big finale, and personally, I was really happy with it. So yes, they did go for a big finale. I think pretty much undeniably, you've got all this stuff going on with the Timeless Child, you've got everything going on with the Cybermen, and it's all balancing between each other, and the Master's in there, and Ashad's in there, and you've got all these different elements, and I think most of it is handled well. Not quite all of it, but most of it. So I think that the story that we got, especially with The Timeless Child, and I kind of touched on this before, you couldn't really get if this wasn't a big finale. You know, you kind of need the stuff to balance off of each other, and I think these different elements balance off each other really well. So this really does tie into the multi-part story thing of, yeah, you need this big finale to be multiple parts, I think, and I think the big finale pays off because it leaves you with a lasting impression of the series, which for me was really positive. For some people, it probably won't have been so positive, but for me, I really liked the finale, most of it, and it left me with a really good taste in my mouth, and it definitely felt like a huge episode of Doctor Who that we haven't really gotten recently. So just overall, in general, I think this series is a big step up from Series 11. I, as somebody who liked Series 11, loved Series 12. I loved some of the stories you get in here. Spyfall, I think, is fantastic. I really, really like Fugitive of the Jadoon, and I think the finale is really solid. And of course, The Haunting of Villa Diodati is just absolutely great. And then you've just got some overall really solid stories throughout this series, and I just think that it is a very consistent series. There's only a couple of episodes that aren't super engaging, and even those ones, they're pretty good. I happen to like Orphan 55. I like Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. I like Praxius. I think those are all good stories. They're not great stories, but they're good. And then you have some just fantastic stories in here. I really liked Can You Hear Me? And just overall, really solid series, engaging stuff with the Doctor and the Master and their dynamic in their episodes. And overall, the Doctor throughout the series is great. And I really do like Yaz in the second half of the series. And it was, of course, nice to see Captain Jack. I'm excited to see what he's going to do later in the show when he does actually get something to do within the story, because he didn't get much to do in this series, but it was so much fun to see him at the very least. That was one of my favorite moments because I was just so excited and completely unexpecting it. Looking back on it, yeah, of course it's a bit of fan service, but I really enjoyed it, and I can't take much issue with it. So yeah, I really do think Series 12 was a huge step up from Series 11. Really solid stuff all around, really engaging stories, good stuff with our main characters for the most part, even though Graham and Ryan do get a little bit sidelined, at least for me. The Master is great, we have some great standout villains, and some really memorable episodes. So overall, I was very happy with this series. If you have any thoughts on Series 12, be sure to leave them down below. I'll be happy to have a discussion. And with all that said, I'll be back to you soon with a review, I believe, of The Evil of the Daleks, and then more classic Who reviews next week. I think I'll have a review of Picard pretty soon. So yeah, all sorts of stuff coming, more Series 12 videos as I get to them. And yeah, with all of that said, that's going to do it for now, folks. I hope to see you around soon, but if not, that's totally cool. Just know that I appreciate your time here today. And with that said, thank you very much for watching. Take care, and have a lovely week.